Alright, yep, here I am again. Sorry, hit the button. Yeah, sorry. Happens almost every day, at least once. Okay, anyway, first off, yeah, I got a PM from somebody, respectable sort, pointing out that deprivated isn't a word. And, yeah, I just don't care. Technically, it's not a word, fine. It says what it needs to say. It's discernible. It's not like hobgoblin. I mean, it's not a word that has no discernible meaning. It's got the aided on it and the depra, and so it says, yeah. So I like it. I think it's a necessary word, to tell you the truth. Deprived implies something different. Deprivated sort of explains the feeling. Yeah, I mean, deprived explains the physical absence of something. Deprivated explains that it needs it. And so it's a necessary word, in my opinion. Quite necessary to really understand psychology. So, yeah, I'm keeping it. Yeah. Anyway, so words is the subject, actually. And what it does to our brains, and how our brains embrace them or control or consume them and reproduce them. You know, related to the modern mystic kind of this idea of what happens to us when a word hits us, when a concept becomes a concept. And so he used apple, so I'll use apple because, yeah, why not? So when I hear apple, what happens to my brain? Big red apple. It's the first thing. It's just a big red standard delicious type apple. Not even my favorite kind of apple. It just happens to be the cliche, you know, the standard. So yeah, that's first. But then as I go appling some more, I go to the opposite, the nice green apple. Good. Which is also sort of related to diarrhea, which isn't very appley. So anyway, then I get back on the subject of apple, and I go to like seed and core and stem, and then you get tree, and then you get sunlight, and you get spots, and you get bugs, and yeah, all those things are all there. And so when I say apple, my brain sort of has associations. And I would almost argue, now we're going to get into this tricky word called weighting, that the brain fills with apple-y kind of things, but it does fill with all of them. I mean, all the representations of apple, we feel all of them, and that we might call intuition, even relating to these other videos, because the feeling is more than the word, but the word takes time to dissect into its context. So your brain does have to take some time to go rummaging through the images and say, oh, well, here's the second most popular image of an apple, you know, by your usage, or whatever the brain standard is. Here's the most emotional apple in your memory. You know, that kind of thing your brain is doing. Your subconscious is ordering and weighting the associations to apple. And it's going to be weighted based on a lot of different things, your entire life, what the most dramatic circumstances are, but obviously current events will also control it. So, you know, if you're currently been thinking or talking a lot about a certain thing, there might be that association would rise to the top when somebody says apple, because, oh yeah, I went apple picking, you know, last month, and there was a hot chicken cut-offs, and it was really cool. You know, whatever happens inside your brain. So anyway, but this weighting thing is sort of interesting, because it's like you could have something like an apple, and you could have bad experiences with apples. You know, an apple fell on your head, or, you know, an apple ruined a date. You were on a date with this girl, and she slipped on an apple, and she blamed you for not, you know, lying down on the apple before she slipped on it, and, you know, jumping on the grenade apple. And, you know, ruined the whole thing, and you didn't get any, and it really sucked. And so you could have those kind of experiences. And what happens when you hear the word apple is that that whole mixed bag of experiential appling sort of just floods in, and it's sort of just weighted. like your brain actually does have a numerical system or weighting or appropriate, like this is a -5 and this is a -3 experience, and then you have like 14 +1 experiences, and you know, there's sort of like this number game. And so when you hear Apple, there's like this mix of feeling that is like, especially with things like that aren't like Apple, things that have positive and negative associations. I mean, it's hard to have negative. Apples are pretty hard to dislike. But other things in life, like even a word like sex. Yeah, it's mostly good stuff, but there's also this downside of sex, which is, oh yeah, dirty porn and rape and wife beating and all kinds of other kinds of shit that you have sort of associated with it. So you hear the word and your brain feels the whole thing. It feels your collective memory, but it can only think one piece of the context at a time. You can't think your whole life experience. You can only feel a whole life experience. So that's sort of the weighting game, where your brain does weight. And so when it floods you with these chemicals and these electrical signals get flooded into your consciousness, maybe that's how the weighting takes place. I mean, it takes place through the flooding process. But the point is that you can sense a degree. So you'll either react to a word, or very well, happy, comfortable, oh yeah, I like that word, I like that concept, I like that idea. Or you'll have that in-betweeny kind of, yeah, okay, that's pretty interesting, but it's got an edge on it. You know, there's some shit tied to that somehow. It's not a pure, clean, easy word. It's a little complicated because it's got something, you know, rumbly in there. Something a little disturbing somehow. That's anyway. So yeah, this is all stuff I just made up. So no scientific merit here. Just kind of a way of just introspection. Just looking through my own brain to see what the hell happens when my brain is confronted with a circumstance. How is it evaluating? And there does seem to be this first impression thing that is very visceral, and it does have a touchy-feely kind of character. And it's after some time passes and your brain starts focusing internally, which is sort of a neat concept. The idea that your brain, just like your eyes, you know, when your brain's controlling them, you can change your focus and identify an object, you know, be stimulated, you know, by the blankness, and something will stick out and attract your attention. And I guess the same thing happens as the brain rifles through the neural connections. You know, ones that have a dominance or a strength about them, an emotional strength, will be the ones flipped through first. And it kind of knows somehow not to be redundant and to tie similar associations together. Like all three, it might feed you three perceptions of Apple, and then there might be a commonality between all three, which might be round or stem or seed or some other concept, and they'll throw that into your brain just because they are all three adding weight to that idea, because if all three have voted for it in a sense, because all three have that tied to them in some way. Yeah, but knowing the exact nuance of the pathways and how exactly our brain does all this crap, yeah, well, I ain't doing that. Like our genetic code, I think our brain probably has a ton of redundancy and sort of spaghetti code, as they call it in programming, you know, where it bounces all over the place and probably doesn't have a whole lot of straight line efficiency, but it just works, so it uses it. But it's gonna the worst kind of code to ever kind of have to dissect to figure out how the guy did what he did is spaghetti code. I mean, it's just so hard to unravel it, so it goes all over the place. And I think a lot of neuroscientists are stepping into that trap, where they're not realizing that it's convoluted. And so, like, this was the old problem. In the old days, they did this little thing where they just stuck a metal probe, stimulated parts of the brain, and saw if somebody said something like butterfly or frog or whatever they imaged when that part of their brain was stimulated. And it was through those experiments that the old canard that we only use 7% of our brain or some other kind of crap like that, or 30%, was invented. It's just because, yeah, somebody didn't say anything when, when a certain part of the brain was stimulated. It didn't mean it wasn't being used. It just means that there was no connection to a concept that could be visualized or associated with one single word, maybe even. So yeah, it was just kind of completely bogus. And I think a lot of this stuff where they start telling us what part of the brain is doing this and what part's doing that, and what, I think they're assuming an awful lot. The trail is more complicated. The brain probably uses all kinds of pieces to get to all kinds of places, and it bounces all over the place in doing that. And there's the real function is probably going to be some subtle little switch, where it has to hit this rock. Everything hits this rock before it goes further. And they're just not going to notice that part, that detail, in looking at the big picture, overviewy, raw information kind of thing. Anyway, I don't want to get a whole critique of neuroscience, but it does seem like they're saying things with a confidence that's probably excessive. But anyway, saying some things they're saying are perfectly reasonable. But anyway, where else do I want to go here? Yeah, but this whole language thing is the key to the smart thing, the logic thing. It unlocks so much of the logic. But I'm sure even without language, our brain has representations of things. I mean, I'm sure a dog knows the difference between his food dish and a tree. I mean, he's identified things. He just doesn't give them words. But in his brain, there's a symbol for it. There's an icon of some kind. And it just doesn't have a verbal association. Okay. Something else I wanted to kind of get to. I mean, like I said, I wanted to get to this language thing and words. But they do break the logic. Like I said, if the words don't have explicit meanings, then they're going to really break any kind of logical conversation. Because then apples are, in fact, oranges. If apple isn't explicitly an apple, and sometimes is an orange, and sometimes is a kumquat, then how could you possibly do anything useful with the word if the receiver might be thinking something entirely different, because they have a different impression of what that word represents. And that's where it all starts to go to hell, when we start using words like spirituality and love, because they're just not very good descriptors of something real, of something explicitly real, something that they don't describe the real psychological phenomenon that they're attempting to describe. Too ambiguous, too loose, too generalized. So, I don't want to go with that. Oh, it's getting hot. Yeah. I know there was another angle. Sorry. Yeah, just trying to reach inside my head a little. Yeah, well, Nick's idea, like I said, that we become something. I don't know where he was going with that. I think it sounded a little bit like he was sneaking in some of that Eastern philosophy crap or something. You know, which, yeah, whatever. It's okay, but you gotta be kind of careful with that stuff. As you well know, Matt believes in astrology now. Oh, man. Anyway, jeez, fucking A. People. Yeah, well, they all go crazy on you. I just don't. That derived energy guy, you know, perfectly credible, logical guy, and he has this obsession with Michael Jackson. Who the fuck could figure that out? And it's a wacky truther obsession. I mean, he really thinks Michael loved children in a good way. And he gave millions of dollars. He gave a tiny fraction of his personal fortune to charity. A tiny fraction. I've given more to the needy of this planet than he has by percentage of income. So don't make him no hero, you silly person. Spent millions of dollars seducing children for his own entertainment. And personally, regarding his creative genius, isn't that really subjective? I never found his music all that fucking magnificent. I mean, really, they're okay songs, some of them, but I never really liked any of it. And as for dancing, I'm not a big fan of that either. So I don't have any use for him. And as a human being, I think he was quite factually out of his fucking mind. But whatever. Crazy bastards. It's just not worth defending. It's just not worth making videos